Working class, the vast majority of the American people, finds its conditions fundamentally under attack. Real wages have not gone up in this country. And by real wages, again, I simply mean the money wage you get adjusted for the prices you have to pay. You can afford as much today with your wages as you could in the 1970s. It's extraordinary. The illusion of a rising standard of living has now been burst because it is now understood to have depended for all that time and at this minute on levels of debt that are generally recognized as unsustainable. Government debt owed by the U.S., corporate debt owed by the business sector, and personal or household debt owned by the mass of people are all at or near record levels. Therefore, no one knows how an economic downturn, when next it hits, will ramify across such a deeply indebted, crisis-ridden capitalism. And the signs of empire decline only became clearer across the year 2024. We are losing the war in Ukraine, which should have made people understand by now this is not a war between Russia and Ukraine. This is a war between Russia and its allies, mostly known as the BRICS nations, and the United States and its allies, mostly known as the G7. In that war, Russia has moved and taken over, in effect, about a third of the country. It is far west of where its former border with Ukraine was, and it's therefore crystal clear who's winning and who's losing. And the destruction of the Ukrainian economy and of many of its cities and railroads and energy system are all testimony to that reality. The corresponding damage on the Russian side is inconsequential. That is a reality. And coming after the American loss of the war in Vietnam and loss of the war in Afghanistan and loss of the war in Iraq, the handwriting is surely on the wall. I would also say that the reality of all of this, while still not clear in the minds of the American people, is lurking just below the surface. So, for example, Americans have become aware that the real competitor of the United States, and it's a competitor in the economic sense for the first time in a century that could be and has been called the American century, because the American empire replaced the British Empire, which could make that claim for the 19th and part of the 20th century. It became clear that China was the new competitor. China, at the beginning of the year, had an alliance with 4 other countries, the 5 countries making up the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. By the end of the year, 6 other nations had formally joined the BRICS, and another 10 to 20 have indicated their desire and intention to do so. This makes the BRICS a global bloc, a part of the world economy, allied together. And if you do the arithmetic, which economists like me do, you will know not only is the BRICS taken together now well over 50% of the people on this planet, but they already, if you add them up, have a larger GDP, gross domestic product, a rough measure of the total output of goods and services in a year, that is already significantly higher than that of the United States and its G7 allies. Britain, France, Germany, Italy, Canada, and Japan. So the harsh reality is we are living through and slowly becoming conscious of the decline, relatively speaking, of the American empire and the rise of, 2024 doesn't yet allow us to say what's coming next. Could it be a Chinese empire? Clearly, if past is prologue, it may well be. But it's also possible that the Chinese mean it when they say they seek a multipolar world, not another empire. And at least for the moment, it isn't clear whether they can achieve that goal or even whether it is altogether their goal. But for the United States, we are in extraordinary difficulty. One of the signs of such difficulty is a level of desperate, incoherent political leadership and policies. The election of Mr. Trump is one symptom of the decline of this empire. So too is the attack on allies who are being browbeaten on the grounds that they're not contributing more to the alliance because the United States can't afford to do what it has been doing and doesn't know how to fix the situation. The intense scapegoating inside the United States of immigrants, of the Chinese, and of a random collection of other demonized others. These are signs of decline. In the 19th and 20th centuries, when the American economy and empire were growing, it invited, it welcomed, and it productively integrated waves of immigrants, huge waves of immigrants. The scapegoating instead, the promised deportation of millions that Mr. Trump has promised, are not the sign of a problem with immigrants. It's a sign that the United States economy is not growing, cannot absorb what it once used as a means to its own advantage and growth. That's a sign of weakness. And so too is the end of a commitment to neoliberal globalization, free trade, and all of that. Just as happened in the British Empire, free trade is no longer advantageous. So it's going to be unfree trade, or what is more politely termed protectionism. And the United States, especially under Mr. Trump, but there was no big difference here from Mr. Biden either, is becoming nationalist and protectionist. It cannot operate a global economy anymore. Only gestures are left for that, while the reality is a turning inward, and in the name of isolating its enemies, what you have is the United States isolating itself. The former leader of the Republican Party in the Senate, a senator named Mitch McConnell, he attacked Trump for being, quote unquote, an isolationist. What Mr. McConnell is pointing out, as your question also does, is that the turn to protectionism, literally the slogan America First, which is what this movement of isolationism back in the 1920s also called itself, the America First movement. He was saying to Mr. Trump, you better be very careful because we are not in the conditions of the 1920s. And an isolationism that was possible as a strategic move then, by the way, ultimately undone by World War II and the active intervention in that war undertaken by the Democratic President Roosevelt. But Mr. McConnell was telling Trump, you don't even have that room that you had a little bit in the 1920s. And it might be useful to answer your questions by spelling out what Mr. McConnell didn't. Here are the key differences. In the 1920s, the United States, while an important up-and-coming capitalist economy, was really still only one of a contesting group. The Japanese contested. Even despite the end of World War I, the Germans rapidly rebuilt their economy, demonstrating that capitalism can come back from cataclysmic world wars if there are the conditions enabling them to do so, which there were at that time. But for the United States, it was still a relatively small global player. It did not depend on global supply chains the way it does now. It did not depend on a global market the way it does now. It did not depend on global capital markets the way it does now. And for those reasons, turning inward and cutting yourself off from the world is a much more difficult undertaking, especially because the last 50 years, the last 3 decades of the 20th century and the first 2 of the 21st, were times of massive outflow of capital from the United States to the rest of the world, the creation of global supply chains, the hollowing out of American manufacturing industry and moving it to Asia, Africa, and Latin America, operating a global system, utilizing the US dollar as a global currency. All of those things make turning inward very difficult, very costly, and therefore liable to provoke many American capitalist corporations to oppose that protectionism because it hurts their interests outside the United States, which have become so much more important than they were in the 1920s. So it might turn out to be, and many of us believe it will, that while it is clever politics for Mr. Trump to talk a big language of punishing foreigners, deporting migrants, imposing tariffs against close allies like the Canadians and the Mexicans. That all looks good. It looks tough. It's the old American empire flexing its muscles, or so it seems on the evening news. It did get Mr. Trump elected. But as real economic policy, much, much, much more difficult. Much of what he says will never happen. He won't even propose it once he's in office, or if he does, it will go down to a defeat. And as is normal in American politics, the Democrats who will help kill his program will go out of their way to hide how much damage they're doing in order that they can attack him later for failing to get his program through. And in case this is murky, let me spell it out. Tariffs are a kind of tax. You can see the chaos of the Republican Party because it's been a party that for the last century has led the way in being, ready, opposed to taxes. And yet its proposals of Mr. Trump to impose tariffs is an immense program pro-taxing. It'll levy taxes on Americans the way they haven't seen for many, many, many decades. It will raise the prices of everything, and it's anti-inflation. That was another part of how Mr. Trump won. How is he going to work this out? No one knows, him included. This doesn't work. And enraging your allies, which his proposals are certain to do, only weakens the United States further.